everyone, and welcome to the show of Summer Tomato Live. I forgot my headphones like a bad girl. What's up? Just let me know if you can hear me, and I'll plug in and we can get rolling. Okay, great. Everything's working. Sweet. So welcome everyone to Summer Tomato Live. I made a big announcement today. Actually, I made it to subscribers yesterday, but I wanted to let everyone know that the show is now free, which is exciting. In the past, up until yesterday, the show was exclusively for Tomato Slice subscribers, and Tomato Slice is my premium newsletter for $3.99 a month. And so the show was closed, and it was kind of a small group of people, and that was nice, but I decided that it would just be better for me to focus on these things separately because their combination was really distracting me. And it was hard for me to keep up. If you guys subscribe on iTunes, you probably noticed that I've been really behind on uploading videos, and it's because it's so difficult for me to maintain that and do the newsletter at the same time. So that is a win for you guys, and it's exciting, and I hope we have a lot more people watching the show. So it looks like so far we have 50, which is pretty good. So the way it works, if you've never been here before, is I'm going to talk about some things, and you can interrupt me at any time by asking questions, and I just want to be here to give you any information you'd like to know about food and health on whatever topic. It doesn't matter. So if you have a question, I wouldn't recommend asking it in the chat room. I do my best to keep an eye on the chat room, but it can start flowing like crazy, and I won't necessarily see any questions you ask there. So if you do have a question, there's a little Ask a Question button on the right-hand side of the screen over there, and you should use that instead. And let's see, one sec. Excellent. So once again, welcome to Summer Tomato Live. And sorry, I forgot to mention that if you have a question, you can use the Ask a Question button on the side, and that's the best way to do it. The other thing you can do is you can call in. But if you call in, please use headphones like I'm doing. Otherwise, there's feedback, and it's really impossible to hear you, and so I will drop the call. So please do not do that. Let's see. So the first thing I wanted to talk about, besides the show now being free, is some studies that came out last week. There was sort of a big hoopla in the health world because a bunch of studies came out showing that various supplements, dietary supplements, were dangerous. So the first one, which is one that I wrote about for KQED Science, which is another place I blog every other week or so. And basically this was a clinical trial testing the effectiveness of vitamin E supplements to prevent prostate cancer. So the reason they thought it prevented prostate cancer in the first place was because they'd done other studies, other trials like this, and they were looking for different things. They were looking for the effect of vitamin E on lung cancer and other things, but they also noticed during those trials that there was a decreased risk of prostate cancer, so they set up this new trial to specifically test whether or not vitamin E could reduce the risk of prostate cancer. And they also were testing selenium, which is another thing that some had hypothesized was associated with a reduced risk. Unfortunately, what happened is they canceled the study because after a couple years, they noticed that the people who were taking the vitamin E supplements as opposed to the placebo condition had a greater risk of death or a greater risk of developing prostate cancer than those who were taking the placebo. And so they canceled the study because they were expecting like a 30% reduction in risk, and they weren't getting that. And it looked like there might, even though it wasn't significant yet, they looked like they had maybe had a problem there. So they canceled the study. Then 4 years later, they analyzed the same people to check on them again, and it turned out that at that point, the data had become significant, meaning that the chances are that it was due to chance is very low. So it looks like a real finding. And this is really scary because these clinical trials are actually the best way to test how a supplement works. And I will explain why that's important when we talk about the next study. So I found this was really scary. But one thing that you shouldn't be scared about is eating foods with vitamin E in them. So the big difference between the studies, earlier studies that had found a reduced risk in prostate cancer and those who have found an increased risk in prostate cancer is the dosage. So the daily recommended allowance by the FDA for a vitamin E of any kind is around, I believe it was around 22 international units, which is reasonable. The previous studies that had found a benefit, they were using 50 international units of vitamin E. In the current study, they were using 400 international units of vitamin E, which is like a huge, huge excess of what they needed. They had reasons for doing this. Obviously, they weren't good enough reasons because that was the main difference. And so if you're worried about this, I would say, so for example, like if you're worried that there's vitamin E in your multivitamin, for example, I don't think you should be worried because those are almost always within a low range that actually has shown a benefit in other trials, although that hasn't been proven 100%. But I definitely wouldn't recommend anyone take the super high dose. Obviously, prostate cancer is only a risk problem for men, but there's no reason women should be taking it either because there's no benefit for the excess vitamin E. So that was one really scary study. The other one that came out that sort of freaked people out was that it was a trial that found that older women who were taking, they tested a lot of different supplements, showed that they had an increased risk of mortality if they were taking multivitamins, vitamin B6, folic acid, iron, and a bunch of other things. And this sort of caused a freak out, and I had a lot, I covered the vitamin E trial extensively, and I kind of ignored the multivitamin one, and I had a lot of people asking me why I was ignoring it. And the reason is because this type of study is really different from the vitamin E trial. So the vitamin E trial was a clinical trial. It used a placebo, it used a drug, it was randomly assigned, it was double-blinded, placebo-controlled. The gold standard for this sort of, for being able to say definitively that something causes something else. The multivitamin study for women was just, they were just analyzing data from the Women's Health Study. So it was an epidemiological study. And these studies, while very valuable for developing hypotheses, cannot tell you anything more than a correlation. So, for example, one reason that can be a problem is because all they did was they looked at a group of people and they said, which ones are taking multivitamins and which aren't, and see if there's any risk of death. Well, maybe the people taking multivitamins didn't feel as well. Maybe they were sick, Maybe they were sicker for some other reason, and therefore they're more likely to die, not because of the multivitamin, but because they weren't randomly assigned to take the drug or not. Control. So it was a correlation. It's interesting. However, there's been a bunch of other studies that have shown multivitamins to be safe. For almost all the supplement studies that I've seen, dosage is the biggest issue. A multivitamin, it covered your bases. It's very, very unlikely that the amounts that you'd find in a multivitamin are going to be dangerous. Whereas if you're testing individual supplements, chances are the dosages are really high. And if you're adding that on top of whatever's in your multivitamin, you know, you're messing with stuff, and that almost always those end up not being beneficial. So I would recommend against individual supplements, and unless you have a specific problem. I take vitamin D because I had my vitamin D tested personally, and it was really low. And vitamin D is hard to get from food. You mainly get it from sunshine. And I live in San Francisco, and it's cloudy here 10.5 months a year. And like I said, I got my own levels tested, and it was low. So I take a small multivitamin, or not a multivitamin, I take a vitamin D supplement for that to get my range back into the healthy range. I do take a multivitamin, and I know you guys are going to ask, so I'll just tell you what I take. And this, I'm not like endorsing this or anything. This happens to be what I'm taking right now. I'm not picky about this stuff, but this is what I'm taking. It's Mega Food, and it's just a once a daily basic vitamin. It's kind of expensive. The reason is because I feel more comfortable taking vitamins that were based on, they come from food. So these are food-derived vitamins, which I hope is less dangerous than anything synthetically made in a lab. But I don't feel super strongly about that. That's just what I take, and I figured you guys would want to ask that. Oh, it looks like things aren't going well, huh? Okay. Well, if you are having trouble seeing me, I'm sorry. I will continue to talk because I am recording this and it should work. Okay. Yeah, so Max already answered your question about how much vitamin E they were using in the study. So here's an interesting question. So GWizzy wants to know if I recommend magnesium citrate. I would say no. So you guys are still skipping? It's perfectly clear on my end. Anyway. Yeah, I'm recording it. I'm recording it, and it should be beautiful later, so don't worry about that. The only other thing, so to answer this question, I wouldn't take magnesium. That was one of the things that was associated with the cause of death in the study of older women. But generally, I mean, what's the benefit of taking a higher dose of something? I don't understand. So I wouldn't recommend it until it's shown to A, be safe, and B, not be dangerous. So that's my take on that. I'm going to check in with you guys. Okay. Sorry that it's skipping. Hopefully the recording will be lovely. All right, next question. So what is the best way to get on and maintain a healthy sleep? This is a great question, and it's something that I personally have struggled with my entire life. I've had insomnia since I can remember as like a toddler. My parents wondered like why I was the freak kid that wouldn't nap, and I don't feel tired, and I can get by on very little sleep. But that's frustrating when you need to sleep. And so I've researched this quite a bit, and one of the most important things to remember when you're trying to set a sleep schedule is that your body has hormones and a biological clock dictates your cycle. Your circadian rhythms is what they're called. And the way you set your circadian rhythms is through consistency, through exposure to light, and through your eating habits, ironically. So the best thing you can do is go to bed at the same time every night, wake up at the same time every day for the most part, eat your meals at the same time every day. Don't eat too close to bedtime. I find that a lot of people can resolve their sleep problems with that. Get plenty of exercise. Even if you can't get formal exercise, walk more. Like I started wearing a Fitbit pedometer recently, and you'd be astounded how little you walk if you don't try to. And it doesn't make you tired. It actually is really enjoyable to walk around the city or walk around the office a little more. So, oh, nobody's watching it? Darn. So a few things you can do, though, let me just finish this thought. A few things you can do is you can get, I think it's called a glow light or something like that. Tim Ferriss recommends it in his book. And it is something a light you can use to shine on your face in the morning to sort of recalibrate your circadian rhythm. So you can go ahead and try that. But otherwise, my number one advice is consistency. Sorry that this isn't working. I'm not sure what's going on. My internet, I just tested the speed of the show, and it's flying. So it's definitely not on my end. Okay. So Brendan wants to know, the FDA's vitamin advice seems low, but given what Dr. Weil's dosage advice is, do you want to clarify that for me in the chat? I generally agree with Dr. Weil on a lot of his points, especially regarding supplements. Well, not especially regarding supplements. That's not true. He takes a lot of herbal remedies and stuff that I am more skeptical of those than he is. But generally, he's really good at adjusting his recommendations based on the data. Generally, if you just keep up with what he says, it's good. But I need to know more specifically what you're talking about. Like, you're talking about a specific vitamin or generally speaking? The FDA's seem low because I think that's safer for the most part. Like for exactly the reason that we've shown, higher doses almost always show no benefit or negative. And with the exception of vitamin D, I think, which people are deficient in, and we aren't getting enough of in our food or through being outside in the sun more. I can't think of any other vitamin that we should have a higher dosage for on a daily basis through supplements. I mean, through food, I think that's great. Oh, here's a answer. I used to try to follow Dr. Weil's recommendations of multivitamins, but now with these new warnings about multivitamins not being so good, you're just a bit worried. Yeah, so like I said earlier, the multivitamin thing, there's been plenty of studies that have shown them not to be fine. And you know, that study, these things select for themselves. So that was in older women. Younger people who tend to have healthier lifestyles tend to take multivitamins and tend to live longer because they have a lot of reasons they're healthy. We don't really have an answer. They definitely, I take them mainly because I find that I get sick less when I'm taking them. I don't have, that's not a study, that's a very anecdotal reason, but it's true. So I just don't, you know, I take the minimum dosage basically, and I just never overdo it, and I never take any additional supplements. All right, somebody is being, dear screener, please remove penis cupcake from the chat room. Thank you. Amazing. Okay, cool, we're getting more questions. Oh, interesting. Any advice for a pescatarian who has a lack of energy since stopping eating meat? So there's a good chance that, one second, I'm just going to try to make sure I can get this guy out of this evil person out. Oh, sorry. I think I accidentally booted the wrong person. Anyway, sorry about that. So if you're lacking energy, there's a very good chance it's due to protein. How much fish are you eating? So I just try to get that protein back up to the levels that you had it when you were eating meat. If you don't want to eat so much fish or you can't afford to eat so much fish, there are good vegetarian sources of protein. Beans and legumes are some of my favorite, and if you are also getting a decent amount of intact grains, you're going to get plenty of protein there. Do you have any more specific, if you have more specific issues, you can either ask me your personal questions if you go to Tomato and ask me, or you can clarify right here. Awesome. Oh, I love this question. What's your best advice for making pizza college student on a budget? So I've was a college student on a budget for the vast majority of my adult life, and I used to make my own pizza. It was really fun. The dough is actually really easy. You can find it's really cheap. It's, you know, just flour and water and yeast and salt basically. So just Google like a very simple pizza dough recipe, and then just use it. The only tricky part with making pizza is it really helps to have a baking stone, because the baking stone gets really, really hot, and that's what gives it the nice crust on the bread. So those are a little bit pricey. Those, I mean, they can range like $50 to $75, but they're a really great thing to have. Like if you are a college student and you're living in sort of a crappy apartments, oven that heats unevenly, it'll help even out your oven. So it has other benefits. Also, it's valuable to have in there to heat stuff on if you don't want it to like fall through the grate. Great for reheating frozen bread, for example. So yeah, and then you just, you know, I would make your own sauce if possible. And, you know, you just get some tomatoes, get some garlic, get some olive oil, and cook them down until it's saucy. Add some oregano is like the secret to pizza sauce flavor. get some decent mozzarella. It's easy to find, and you know, some basil or whatever else you want. So fun. That sounds like a great hobby. Awesome. So I feel bad I booted somebody in accident. Anyway, can people still hear me? As a pizza restaurant employee. So Max Corso says as a pizza restaurant employee, he can tell us that as long as everything is fresh, it'll be good. And I generally agree with that. Pizza is really good when you make it fresh. The pizza stone really helps a lot. I've heard that if you don't have one, you can try like turning a baking sheet upside down and putting down parchment paper with cornmeal or something, but that's probably not going to be as effective as a pizza stone or a baking stone. Yes, guys, I'm sorry that the lag is unfortunate. We're almost done, though. So if you have any more questions, my recording is going to be pristine, and it'll be up eventually. So if you have any more questions, feel free to ask them, and I'll answer as best I can, and you can watch it later. Or we could just stop. And thank you, Saka and Alexia, for the tweets. There was one other thing that I could talk about briefly. Is that something here at home is, well, we're really interested. I personally have found a lot of benefit from increasing the amount of probiotics in my diet. I did a whole show on probiotics. You can go. Well, we're really interested. I personally have found a lot of benefit from increasing the amount of probiotics in my diet. I did a whole show on probiotics. You can go check it out on Summer Tomato. But to sort of get more into that, we have been trying to make our own sauerkraut and kimchi and stuff. So we just got a new pot to make it in, and we got all the probiotics, and fermented foods are a great thing to experiment with, especially, I mean, they're healthy for a lot of reasons, but they're especially helpful if you have digestive problems. The thing is, you need to test different kinds. So there's different strains of probiotics, and depending on whether you make, you know, kimchi or whether you're making kombucha or miso, they're going to have different strains, and different ones could help you. So experiment, figure out what works for you, and even try combining them. And then whatever you find, if it works, stick with it, because it doesn't stay if you stop eating those foods. So it looks like no one is hearing me anymore. So I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. Thank you guys so much for attending. I will talk to some people about the streaming issues and see if we can't get that fixed for next time. But thank you again. If I didn't get to your question, or if you have a more personal question or anything like that, go to the Ask Me section of Summer Tomato, and there are options for you there. You can either subscribe to my newsletter, Tomato Slice, or you can just ask me a question a la carte via the instructions there. So thank you guys so much, and have a lovely evening, and I'll see you next time.